Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Churches of Central Alabama, which includes our congregation here in Tuscaloosa and in Birmingham. We are led by Reverend Julie Conradi. I am Mary Weeks, this morning's lay service leader. Whoever you are, whomever you love, wherever you are today, and wherever you are on your spiritual journey, you're welcome here. To all who are here this morning, welcome home. Announcements. Please be sure to read the newsletter and the e-blast on the Newsnet to stay informed on upcoming events. One event I would like to call your attention to is Wednesday night. This Wednesday night, Mike Reeves and I will be playing some music for you guys. Come take a listen to us. It's 6:30 to 8. There'll be snacks and BYOB, and we would love to have folks here. Come hear us. Other announcements from the floor. Yes, Anna.
Next Saturday is a movie afternoon, and we're doing something really strange. It's a comedy, trust us. So it'll be 3 o'clock here. So we've been doing some very serious stuff in the movie evening or afternoon. So come be ready to laugh.
We're not allowed to know the title.
It will come out tomorrow.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
I cannot remember it.
We're such- okay. Anyone else? Yeah. The prelude prepares us for the service. Please rise and body your spirit for the lighting of the chalice. We light our chalice this morning with our hearts turned toward the work of our congregation. We have inherited this institution from generations of people who believed in the power of human beings to bear love into the world. We carry this tradition for those who find comfort, inspiration, and joy within its real and virtual spaces. We tend the spark of imagination and hope for the world to come. In the spirit of inclusivity, please welcome those around you.
That's my seat.
Whatever the need that brings you to this special place and hour, know most surely that it is best served through eager receptivity of mind and heart. If it be to take a firmer step toward the lifting horizon of high thought, if it be a desire to give assistance to feeling that should range and are true, if it be to challenge the way of your life, if it be to find your place as a part of a caring and serving community, then let your mind consider well what is here thoughtfully given. Then let your heart accept freely what is here lovingly shared. Please rise and body your spirit for our first hymn, number 134, Our World is One World. Our church is supported by those who call our church home and by those who support the efforts of our church to change our world for the better. If this is your first time with us, please let the plate pass. We're just glad you're here. If you wish to join our church this morning, please come up during the offertory to sign the membership book. We share our cash plate every Sunday with organizations whose work reflects UU values to care for marginalized persons, advocate for real and systemic change, defend our environment, and promote justice and equity for all. Today's Split the Plate is it Turning Point? Am I correct? Yes, it's Turning Point. Thank you for your generous support of our church and our Share the Plate recipient. May we give in love and hope. By the work of our hands and the infusion of our hearts, our love is made real. When we gather in loving community, we remember that we do not travel alone. We share our lives as we light candles and hold each other in meditative thought and reverence. We invite you to come forward and light a candle from the common flame. You may do so in silence if you wish, or briefly share a milestone with us. Please come forward.
Hi, my name is Monty. I listen to NPR. I drive quite a distance to get here. So I'm lighting this candle on behalf of a friend from New Orleans. His name was Bob Siona, and he's passed, and he was a World War II veteran, and he was in Hiroshima. And it affected his entire life. He lived in an impoverished small apartment near me. His entire life, he was a wonderful man. And I heard that there's events going on in Hiroshima, and I just thought about him. Thank you.
Morning. I'm lighting a candle for all of the queer people in Florida who are now legally able to be denied health care should a healthcare provider, including a first responder, refuse on moral grounds.
There we go. I'm Gene Bird, and if you check, I think I'm trying to get this on my Facebook page, but last night my wife Kathy got an award established in her name for the future by the League of Women Voters of Alabama for membership and leadership development. It sounds ambiguous, but it means going to Muscle Shoals and setting up the mechanics of starting a Women Voters chapter there, going to Huntsville and working with the mechanics to setting up a chapter there, and going to Dothan to get it. It gave me a chance to see all the Peanuts statues in Dothan, but in any case, so this is an important thing because it continues the effort to ensure that everyone can vote.
I'll light one final candle for any burdens or celebrations that go unspoken. May the warm light of these flames bring us peace. Please join me in the spirit of meditation, followed by a moment of silence. Today's meditation was adapted by Kevin Tarsa. May I remember in this tender moment that love is my guide, always shepherding me toward ways of openness and compassion. I have what I need, really, with love at my side, above me, below me, in front of me, behind me, inside every cell of me. Love infused everywhere. Just when the weight of the world I inhabit threatens to drop me in a place and press my hope down into the ground beneath me, love invites me to rest for a gentle while and leads the center of my soul to the quiet, still, restoring waters that I had not noticed. And so, love, quietly, sets me once again on its tender and demanding path, even when the walls close around me and the cries of death echo through untold corners, gripping my heart with fear and sadness. I know that all will be well, that I will be well. When love whispers near to me, glints at the corner of my eye, rests with gentle and persistent invitation upon my shoulders. Yes, love blesses me, even as the sources and symbols of my pain look on. Love blesses me from its infinite well, and I turn and notice the goodness and kindness and grace follow me everywhere. I live in a house of love, love that will not let me go. I live in a house of love and always will. Let's take a few moments of silence. Amen, and blessed be. Today's speaker is Ron Buda. Let me introduce you. Let me give the whole spiel here. Ron is one of our own, as most of you know, retired UA professor of astronomy. Several books out, not all on the cosmos, some about rocks. He has 2 books on geology, Pennsylvanian Footprints in the Black Warrior Basin of Alabama, as well as Footprints in Stone. His books on the cosmos are, and if I'm pronouncing this right, De Vocaler, Atlas of Galaxies, and Cosmic Pinwheels. Welcome, Ron.
I'll have you know, one of the last times I gave a talk was when there were several baby showers planned here. It was a wonderful day, a wonderful spring day, lots of sunshine. And you want to know what my topic was? My topic was, such evil exists. And, well, I haven't forgotten that one. This one is not necessarily on astronomy, but I do want to talk about something I've titled in quotes called For Love of Country. And people are thinking about that probably a little bit more than they may have given events in the past few years. I just want to say a little bit about patriotism. And from my point of view, as a diehard scientist, a family man, and an American, things like that. From my point of view, first of all, I have to prove that I have a point of view because I'm utterly preoccupied with even though I'm retired, I'm utterly preoccupied with astronomy. I ought to be paid for it again. I'm still doing it. But anyway, I'll try and read some of it here. I say here that patriotism is a complex emotion for many people, which I think it might be right. Most people feel patriotic to the country they were born in. And especially if that country has a strong appeal to one's identity. If you feel like you identify with a country, then patriotism would be very important. And as long as change seems not to be too rapid, change being the way the content of a country looks from the outside, say, may change. And as long as the change is not too rapid, you might be able to keep political and social strife at bay in such a country. But what happens to a country when change is so rapid that some people, especially those who claim to most identify with that country, begin to feel threatened by the changes? Then there could be a problem then. In such a case, sinister forces. And from me, you don't have to take it too seriously because I prefer my scientific duties to any of this stuff I'm going to talk about today. In such a case, sinister forces lurking beneath the surface can bubble out and threaten the very existence of the country, which we do know is possible. And this is what I think we are seeing in our country today, a reemergence of ill feelings of colossal proportion that jeopardizes not only this country's existence, that not only jeopardizes the existence of the country that we call the United States of America, but also the world's oldest democracy. And so I wanted to say a little bit about patriotism from my point of view, in which I said was the point of view of a scientist, a diehard scientist, American, a family man, and also a human being, whatever that means. I also want to say a little bit about nationalism in America, because I don't know if you can avoid that subject when you talk about patriotism. I want to do these things because like many Americans, I'm alarmed by the rise of extremism in our country. An extremism that is both dangerous, which makes no attempt to hide what it wants to do. And so it seems to be there, maybe we should look at it. But to set the tone of this presentation, I want to recount an interesting monologue from the 1961 movie Judgment at Nuremberg, which many of you have probably seen, but you haven't seen for a very long time. In this movie, Spencer Tracy, who I thought was terrific, he plays the head of 3 judges in the trials of 4 members of the Ministry of Justice in Nazi Germany after the war was over. And one of the Nazi judges, Ernst Janning, it was his name, who was expertly played by Burt Lancaster. And if you want to look for the right way to do a monologue as an actor, follow him, because I heard somebody else who did the same monologue, and I thought, golly, how terrible could it be? But when you do it right, the monologue has a high impact. So let me just say, so the 3 judges. Spencer Tracy is one of 3 judges who was set to judge the Ministry of Justice in Nazi Germany. And Ernst Janning is a highly educated and accomplished purveyor of the law in pre-Nazi Germany who feels extreme remorse for his actions during World War II. And he recounts to the tribunal how successful Germany had become under Hitler but then makes a surprising confession. He says, what about those of us who knew better, who knew Hitler's words were lies and worse than lies? Why did we go along? Why did they go along? And the answer was, because we loved our country. Because we loved our country. And he says, what difference does it make if a few political extremists lose their rights? What difference does it make if a few racial minorities lose their rights? It is only a passing phase. It is a stage we are going through. It will be discarded sooner or later. Hitler himself will be discarded sooner or later. The country is in danger. We must march forward. Forward is the great password. And history tells how well we succeeded, he says, to the tribunal. Things that have been denied to us as a democracy were now open to us. The world said, take it. Take the Sudeten land. Take the Rhine land. Take it. And then we looked around and saw that we were in even greater danger. What was to be a passing phase had become the way of life. And so, if I were going to be an actor, I would want to make sure I knew how to do that monologue exactly, because that monologue required terrific talent to do. And I recommend that what I've read to you here is only a small part of that monologue. I highly recommend listening to the whole thing, but I think it illustrates the basic idea that patriotism is a love of one's country and a pride as well. But I think it also illustrates that how patriotism can slide easily into nationalism. In Nazi Germany, the quote, be proud to be German, which is what Hitler would say, degenerated into Deutschland über alles. Be proud to be German degenerates into Deutschland über alles. A transformation, which I suppose one could say, that led to some of the most monstrous crimes ever committed against humanity. I mean, do we agree with that? I mean, Germany lost World War I and had suffered through a rampant inflation. I mean, when we talk about inflation here, it's never anything like what Germany experienced during the 30s, 20s and 30s. They would have to pay 2.5 million marks for a stick of butter. That was how awful inflation was in their time. And also the Allies had imposed crushing reparations against Germany to destabilize its government, which was the Weimar Republic. And Germany then plunged into an abyss. So that's what we had to look at. And now we could ask, I don't know if we want to ask this this annoying question, is could what happened in Nazi Germany happen here? I think absolutely it could. Is America heading down the path of Nazi Germany in the 1930s and 40s? Are we heading towards a government based on an obviously, I hate to say it, I may have to say it, I think it's based on a false version of Christianity. Because I grew up I was baptized as a Catholic. I believe I grew up as a Christian, and I may be a naturalist now. But I'm not necessarily opposed to Christianity. I think it can produce good in the world. But I think that hell hath no fury like a religion with weakening influence. Christianity, as embodied by the Christian right, has sold its soul to a man who can only be described to me as the howling man of Twilight Zone fame. Now let people, if you haven't seen the Twilight Zone, the howling man, you should see it, and you can make fun of my view of it because it reminded me of somebody. Well, anyway, now I want to ask, after having gone through that, is democracy a good form of government? On the whole, I think it is, but only if people feel that their vote counts. Your vote, you have to feel like your vote counts, because if you vote and you don't think it's going to matter, the other guy is always going to win. If rigged elections designed to elect mainly a particular strong man to office do not inspire confidence, and American democracy differs from many because we do not allow president for life. Isn't that, thank goodness? Do we want anybody who's ever been president to be president for life? Probably not. And we have a peaceful transfer of power as guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution, which can be difficult to deal with. And we have a Bill of Rights that goes beyond what many countries have. Now, for example, I remember this from a long time ago because I'm usually thinking about these things. For example, in China, the government posts the rights of the people on bulletin boards. And they say, next to those rights, they say, you have the right to accept these principles, but you do not have the right to oppose them. Now, suppose the Bill of Rights says you do not have the right to oppose. Well, you said there are things you have to accept, there's things you can't accept. You can't be opposed to. That's not democracy. You have to be opposed. You have to be able to be free to be opposed to something, however bad you might look to others. And I recall how conservatives misunderstood American democracy when they tried to ban American flag burning. Now, I grew up during the Vietnam generation. I didn't participate in any protests because, for one thing, I preferred my scientific duties, just like Spock. I preferred my scientific duties, but I never imagined myself protesting the American war in Vietnam. But flag burning was opposed by many conservatives, and it could be that many liberals too didn't like it. But if there is any flag in the whole world that can handle flag burning, it's the United States flag. There's no other country, no other flag in the whole world where the flag can become a form of protest. And I think even the people who burn the flag are not necessarily unpatriotic. They're protesting something, and there may be good reason for them to do so. And not only this, but in America, you can openly criticize not only politicians, but the president as well. I mean, look at what people say about the president, any president. You can say those things and get along with it. You can say out loud to a big group of people that President so-and-so is a colossal fool. Would you be able to do that without being arrested in China, for example? You wouldn't probably. So in our society, you can do things like that. Now, a potential flaw of democracy in general is that while there may be two or more candidates running for an office, only one can win. And if the losing candidate looks around and thinks he cannot possibly have lost the election, he can be a disruptive of the process. And it's very hard to all the things we've seen, the so-called big lie, it's hard to evaluate sometimes. And as shown by what happened on January 6th, this disruption can be made to the process. And America is still under threat by people who did not accept the results of the 2020 election. As a boomer, now I'm getting to me. As a boomer, I was born only 7 years after Victory in Europe Day, and don't try and figure out how old I am from that. After VE Day, almost to the 7 years to the day. And although the war had been over for a while by then, it was still fresh in the minds of those who lived through it, as evidenced by the many stories my mother told me, and I've recounted them here many times, of her life in the former Yugoslavia during the war. And with the fall of Japan and Germany, American patriotism ran high after World War II. America emerged from that war as a major world power, and we all remember that, and it was important. I grew up during the 60s believing that my country, America, was a nation that was empathetic to the plight of other nations. In short, we were the, quote, good guys. I've always viewed us as the good guys. This was shown, for example, by the Marshall Plan, which benefited my mother. There's a picture of my mother when she was in a refugee camp in Austria, carrying out loaves of bread from the Marshall Plan. And I thought and those came from America. And I saw that as America being empathetic to the plight of other people. But nevertheless, this facade is a bit of a facade, hid fairly well the undercurrent of deep ill feelings that lay below the surface. And some of the deep resentments left over from the Civil War continued. Now, the Cold War seemed to temporarily unite Americans against a common enemy. There was a great Outer Limits episode about where people tried to make a common enemy again out of some alien being called a Satan. And it's one of the coolest episodes of the old Outer Limits TV series. Well, anyway, that enemy, the enemy that we chose as our common enemy, was communism, right? Actually, I'm not sure I can say right, but that's what it seemed to be, communism, especially as embodied by the Soviet Union, which still existed back then, which became known as the evil empire. While America was trying to make the world safe for democracy, the Soviet Union stimulated and often helped engineer socialist revolutions in other countries, including Yugoslavia, which is where my mother was during all of this. And it is against this backdrop that I recall, as a teenager living in Baltimore, seeing a sign on the side of a bus that showed a picture of the Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev with a clenched fist. He's going like this, and he says, and in big letters, there's this, he's quoted as saying, "We will bury you. We will bury you." And I don't remember exactly the year, but I'm sure I was in high school. The odd statement was first made in 1956. I had to look this up later. I didn't know this at the time, but it was first made at a UN meeting. It was repeated a few years later, although it is now thought that Khrushchev meant this in a competitive sense. How could anybody interpret this any other way? But that sounds kind of menacing for somebody to say, "We will bury you," of the character of the Soviet Union. But anyway, it was thought that Khrushchev meant this in a competitive sense. Seeing this sign was very alarming for me, and indeed many Americans. You see this on the side of a bus, and I'm only 16 years old or so, and I see the sign, "We will bury you." And it seemed to connote a desire on the part of the Soviet Union to basically annihilate the West. That's what it sounded like. To basically annihilate the West in some kind of armed nuclear conflict. I can't remember when I saw the bus sign. I think it was in high school in 1967 or 68. By the time when I saw the sign, the Cold War had been raging for almost 20 years, at least since the Berlin airlift in 1948. In its zeal to protect their totalitarian states from Western influence, the Soviet Union, the purveyor of much of the political strife in the post-World War II period, put up a symbolic iron curtain over the countries under its influence. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy in November 1963. When I was 11 years old, was a pivotal event in my life. It was suspected, but I don't know if it was really proven, that the assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, had ties to the Soviet Union. Years later, I visited the grave of JFK at Arlington National Cemetery and saw the eternal flame there. And it was one of the saddest things from my youth that I ever saw. Well, anyway, communism was a fearful and menacing view of the world that opposed private ownership of land, privately run industry or business, or anything that would lead a person to excessive wealth. All means of production was placed into the hands of the government, which operated as a one-party system, and I hate to say this, made up of bureaucrats who had the power to stick their noses into the private lives of the people. I think that's what it always seemed to be. Because no majority of people in any country embraced socialism by voting for it in a democratic free election, many communist governments could only be installed by a strong man, leading a small band of supporters in a violent revolution. As far as I know, all of those governments came to power that way, not through democratic means. Although communism sounded good because it guaranteed a job for every person, it has a fatal flaw, which considerably influences its ability to compete with Western capitalism. a lack of incentive for creativity. I have no evidence that that's actually true. It just seemed to be that way. Another problem, and I say here, for this, capitalism is an essential element. For creativity, capitalism seems to be an essential element. Maybe it isn't, but it just seemed to be at that time to me. Another problem is the absolute nature of socialist governments. Socialist communist societies became known as totalitarian dictatorships. And they were described by this famous lady, Hannah Arendt, I think. She wrote a book on totalitarian governments to explain them. And in these societies, loyalty to the leader was paramount, and opposition to the government was punishable by death. Usually, or hard labor. Dissent was not tolerated to any degree. Communism in the Soviet Union came on the back of the Bolshevik Revolution. Led by Vladimir Lenin, who was so opposed to capitalism so that he advocated the armed rebellion in the name of the working classes, which he called the proletariat. Thus, countries began to fall from either monarchical or democratic governments in favor of socialist dictatorships. Yipes. Now, one of those countries was Vietnam. The revolution in Vietnam, led by Ho Chi Minh, who was once pro-USA, turned out to be symbolic of the domino effect in Southeast Asia. It was felt that if one country in a given area went communist, then others would fall like dominoes in the same area. The Vietnam War was viewed as necessary in order to prevent this effect. Although initially the Vietnam War was a socialist revolution, it was also strongly viewed by the Vietnamese as a war of liberation from foreign influences and occupiers. Throughout the Vietnam conflict, which raged from 1965 to 1973, Americans were reminded of what we have and what we were defending. Ours was a democratically elected government where people could own land, where capitalism was the dominant means of production. Our society, which was not a totalitarian dictatorship, was the total opposite of socialism. Americans had freedoms that no communist society could have. Because no communist government came to power democratically, all came to power through violent revolution. Each revolution allowed for the existence of only one party, the Communist Party, opposition to which was not allowed. Americans had a two-party system, at least, and a Bill of Rights bestowed by the Founding Fathers that guarantees freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, among other things. Because there were two parties, opposition to the government was not a crime. You can be for the policies of one party and opposed to those of the other, of course. We were free men, while the men of socialist societies were not. The strong man aspect of socialist dictatorships led to peculiar, dangerous, monarchical-style governments where the first strong man, that is, the one who led the victorious revolution, became like a deity who would bestow the leadership after his death on another member of his family. Fearing the influence of the West, which they all did, who would see the strong man as a menace rather than a deity. The people would be told that the cult family had male leaders who displayed adult acumen at very young ages. The country would isolate itself from the outside world. The people would be trapped in subservience to the leader. And today, such a country actually exists. It's North Korea. Having failed to unite North and South Korea under their cult dictatorship, North Korea sank into isolation, while South Korea became a modern country. If the difference between North and South Korea had only been a matter of socialism versus capitalism, the two countries could presumably interact in some ways because we interact with other socialist countries like China a lot. But because of the cult leader, North Korea became a dangerous nuclear nation that likely would take down the whole country if it meant protecting the leader. They'd be nuts about that. Now, my views on patriotism, it took me a long time to get to my views on patriotism, were molded mainly by the Vietnam War and, of course, by the U.S. space program. It's very, very important for me. On one hand, I saw the U.S. space program and the moon landings as rays of hope in a sea of darkness. But mainly, they were huge accomplishments that made me proud to be an American. And I'm still feeling that pride whenever I hear something from the James Webb Space Telescope or something that shows America leading in some way in science and technology and things like that. And even, today there's even still much to be proud of that didn't exist in the 60s when I was growing up. Now, once patriotism during the late 60s could have been confused by the unpopular nature of the Vietnam War, which sparked massive protests, mostly by college students in the late 60s and early 70s. And I saw one of the biggest protests in May of 1970. I was a student. I was a high school student. I think I had just graduated from high school, or was about to. And I was partaking in a program called the NASA Youth Science Congress, which was great because it allowed young people interested in science to go to a real scientific place called NASA place called Greenbelt, Maryland, National Aeronautics and Space Administration. And one of the great things they had us do was meet real scientists at this place. And I thought that, I still remember the fellow I met. His name was John Brandt. He worked on the solar wind. For a long time, I just loved solar science because I got to meet someone who was an expert in it. And so things like that do matter. Well, anyway, I was going home. I hopped on a bus. I had to go back to Baltimore. I don't remember how far away it was. And suddenly, I'm going this way. I'm in the backseat of the bus. And there's U.S. Route 1 is here. And suddenly thousands of people started crowding that road and stopped all the traffic on that road. I got out in the nick of time. But that's the most major war protest I ever saw. It was protesting Nixon's bombing of Cambodia. And I don't think it was that far late. I don't think it was that much later than the Kent State shooting, which I think were on May 4th. It was at that time when college campuses were really, really unstable, about to fall apart. Well, anyway, the bombing of Cambodia destabilized their government to the point where by 1975, an educated man named Pol Pot, he mobilized a band of less educated supporters, willing to do his bidding, basically, known as the Khmer Rouge, to engineer a socialist revolution that sought to turn Cambodia into an agrarian society. I guess he didn't like that. I guess he was living in the wrong century. He wanted to live in an earlier century. He certainly didn't seem to be interested in our century at the time. Intellectuals, he said here, people who showed no signs in their hands of hard labor, were sent from the cities to the countryside to either be forced into labor or killed by the Khmer Rouge. Intellectuals were considered enemies of the state, and many were brutally executed in those camps. Many of you have seen The Killing Fields, which shows that dramatic fashion. But in spite of it all, I felt that America still constituted the good guys. I still did. America still provided considerable aid to foreign countries, but after the fall of Saigon in 1975 and the election of President Jimmy Carter in 1976, Americans began to look inward for enemies. Right? They began to look inward for enemies. And in 1979, Iranian revolutionaries took 400, I forgot how many Americans, maybe it was 50 Americans hostage. They were trapped in Tehran, and they held them hostage for over a year. Americans trapped in Tehran and held them, the failure of President Jimmy Carter to decisively get their release of the hostages, led to Ronald Reagan's election in 1980. President Carter, who sought to negotiate the safe release of the hostages, was viewed as weak. And Reagan is strong because the hostages were released on Reagan's inauguration. Now, after Reagan's election, Republicans began to question government spending, and they hit Democrats hard for advocating for big government, such that in 1994 there was a Republican wave that swept many long-term Democrats out of power. And the rhetoric against Democrats became harsh, and small government conservatives flocked to the so-called Tea Party. Now, conservative rhetoric took on an us versus them aspect. Us versus them. And that's a problem, I think. For the next 20 years, we had mostly smaller government. But we also had relatively normal presidents and vice presidents. I mean, at least that's the way it looked. But then in 2016, Donald Trump was elected president, and and he did not win by a landslide, as any other president would have acknowledged, but nevertheless decided to always talk about it as if he had. He talked about winning by a landslide anyway, even if he didn't. And it was an effective process that he did that. Anyway, he did not win by a landslide. He had considered himself a stable genius on account of his uncle, John Trump, who had been a professor of engineering at MIT. He was suggesting that having a smart relative like John Trump meant that he was also smart. Well, anyway, from the beginning, I hate to say this, he started playing fast and loose with the facts. Well, anyway, a key to Trump's success was that as a rich, self-proclaimed elitist, he developed a rapport with the poorly educated and addressed many people's concerns about immigration and the religious right's desire to criminalize abortion. He became so popular with his base of support that he said he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose any votes. He attempted to sell himself as a super patriot by hugging flags and claiming to support the military by increasing funding for it. He's going to build a wall to keep Central American immigrants out of the U.S. And before long, he did become a cult figure in the Republican Party. People liked the fact that he didn't believe in political correctness. And that may be true of a lot of people. I don't know. But he preferred to tell it like it is. His influence became so important that Republicans running for re-election or election had to be in his good graces in order to be successful. The most alarming thing about this is that Trump promoted the idea that his enemies were his base's enemies also. And that only he stood in the way of the left's desire to destroy America. Boy, that's a serious charge. As a result, us versus them has become the way of life in America, or a way of life in America. And not only this, Trump presented him and his supporters basically as victims of sinister Democrats and something known as the deep state, which exists to suppress conservatives. The violence January 6th was falsely attributed to a mysterious and really non-existent group known as Antifa, which is short for anti-fascist. It's surprising that Republicans chose this name for what they consider to be a dangerous group who march with Black Lives Matter protesters and often resort to violence. Yet, one could argue that Antifa defeated the fascist regimes of Hitler and Mussolini. They were fascist governments. We defeated them in World War II. Therefore, we are Antifa. Not the people that they were looking at. So, far from being the bad guys, Antifa should be seen as the good guys. The enemy of America is not Antifa, but Profa. Well, I've only got a few more paragraphs. The rise of anti-liberalism in America, to me, has been one of the most dangerous and alarming developments in modern times. It's been going on for a long time, too. Although liberalism has long been seen as elitist, overeducated people who use their excessive education to tell the rest of society what to do. The movement is more sinister than one might imagine. In their zeal to promote the idea that America is a Christian nation, American conservatives see liberalism as a bastion of atheism. And atheism is never considered good by such believers. American conservatives see liberalism as the bastion of atheism, including people who support abortion. One can see the effects of liberalism throughout our society, and you know what I mean. You turn on TV and you see it in the TV shows and ads. You can see that people have made headways in American society. The diversity has increased substantially on TV and TV commercials, and it's just a minor thing. But you can see that. You can see that our society has changed, and it's changing rapidly. And maybe there are people who don't like those changes, and that's what's at the heart of a lot of this anti-liberalism. One can see the effects of liberalism throughout American society, through TV commercials having black or mixed race families and significant presence of LGBTQ plus people, as well as highly educated black people who have a strong presence on news and talk shows. How often did we ever see that when I was growing up in the 60s? I never saw a black anchor or people like that, but we did have, what's the name of that guy? The guy who said, and that's the way it is, was it Walter Cronkite? We had Walter Cronkite, who was superb nonetheless. Now, note that, I do want to say something here. Note that socialism is not necessarily a bad thing. It's been painted as bad. There are certain things that only government is strong enough to do or has the reach of government. Protection of the environment is probably something done best by government. And then you have Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Obamacare. Those sound like government programs to me. None of this stops people from trashing all things socialist every election cycle. Now, getting back, and I got two more paragraphs, getting back to the yawning monologue, one obvious difference between what happened in 1939 and in 2022 is that the World War II allies did not try and stop the invasion of Poland or the taking of the Sudeten and Rhinelands. I don't think there was any opposition to that. Germany took the Rhineland, the Sudetenland, and the Allies did nothing. Invaded Poland, and I don't think the Allies did anything because they just ran right into Poland. And it was a tragedy, of course. This time, it seems like we have not left Russia. And for some reason, I don't understand Putin. Millions of people, millions of Russian citizens were killed in World War II due to the Nazis. And yet, he acts like he doesn't even remember that. And he's setting them up for doing the same thing. I don't understand that guy. It is true that no American ground troops have been committed to the Ukrainian conflict, and that the role of Ukrainian President Zelensky in engaging Allied support has to be acknowledged. In conclusion, I think most Americans are not interested in pledging allegiance to a Confederate-like flag that represents a time conservative Americans seem to be pining for. Conservatives want to return to a time when abortion was not a right, when white male Americans were solidly in charge and black Americans were stuck. And I don't mean all conservatives, I mean some. Some that we hear on TV a lot. People, and that black people, women, and LGBT plus, Q plus people are making inroads into society. At the same time, as a result of all this, demagoguery has reared its ugly head through white nationalist tendencies, running amok. If democracy is to survive, there's no other way but at the ballot box. That's all I'm advocating. I'm not advocating any violence involved in this. That's all I had to say. I hope I have said something meaningful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron.
You're welcome.
Please stand as you're willing and able for our hymn in the Teal hymn book. It's 1028.
Thank
Blessed is the path on which we travel. Blessed is the body that carries you upon it. Blessed is your heart that has heard the call. Blessed is your mind that discerns the way. Blessed is a gift that you will receive by going. Truly blessed is a gift that you will become on the journey. May you go in peace. May our lives be reflections of the beauty, peace, and joy that is possible in the world. Thank you so much, Ken. Service is ended. We have coffee, and we have a congregational meeting. After coffee and conversation, may you go in peace.